Who was the Emperor Justinian? That is the question we will be addressing in today's lecture, roughly speaking. So hello and welcome everybody to another edition of the Saturdays for the Byzantines podcast. My name is Professor Wren. I am your host. Not actually professor, don't actually have a PhD, don't actually work at a university. Okay. Now the little disclaimers out of the way. If you have found this video on YouTube, please make sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and then hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. I need to give a big shout out, thank you to the YouTuber Admiral Price, who plugged my channel and our Fall of Rome, Barbarian Invasion series finales, Fall of Rome video on his channel. Admiral Price, some of you guys may not know, is a Total War YouTuber. I've been a fan of his for several years now. I think he's really the best Total War YouTuber who no one knows about. In essence, you know, there's guys out there with like several 100,000 or million subscribers who just don't give you the same insight into the games the way Admiral Price does. He's really good at that, and he's a cool dude. I've talked to him several times, you know, kind of online. He's a good guy, and I thank him a lot for plugging my channel. He helped us get that Fall of Rome video up to over 100 views. That's my first video with 100 views, so that's really cool. Drove some traffic to the channel, so definitely, if you like the Total War series, go check him out. And as well, history. He's also a history PhD student, which is really cool as well. So I can't thank him enough. It's really big. So yeah, I'm really happy about that. If you are listening on Google Play or Apple Podcasts, please make sure to give us a follow. And then especially if you're listening on iTunes, please give us a 5-star review. That really helps. And then if you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can leave those in the YouTube comments. That's the best way for you guys to get in touch with me and to interact with me. And you can post questions and I will answer the questions either in the comment section or maybe even if I think the question warrants a longer response than just a YouTube comment, I might turn it into a video, which I have done in the past. We did that with the identity in the Holy Roman Empire video that was inspired by a question from a viewer. So you never know when I will take one of your questions and turn it into a video. So with that being said, let's jump into the subject for today's talk, roughly speaking. And we're getting into Justinian here. So Justinian is obviously the last great Roman emperor, and you could make the argument that he is one of the greatest Roman emperors. Because when you think about it, I don't know if there was another emperor who expanded the empire as much as Justinian did under the reign of one guy. Considering that he took back North Africa, Western North Africa, he took back Italy, Sicily, Corsica, Sardinia, the Balearic Islands, and parts of Spain. I mean, maybe Trajan with his military expansion took over more land, but it's certainly close. And considering, you know, the starting position where Justinian comes from, I would make the argument that his accomplishments are more impressive than really any other Roman emperor. You know, especially considering he's only dealing with half of the empire that all, you know, when we think of all the other great emperors, we're thinking of Trajan and Hadrian and Octavius, Augustus, Caesar. You know, all those guys are dealing with the full East and West Empire. Justinian does all this with half of that. So I think that really is super impressive, and it would tilt the scale, at least in my opinion, in his favor in terms of the best of the Roman emperors. And regardless of whether or not you think he is the best, he's certainly the last great Roman emperor. Although there are a number of really good Byzantine emperors who come after him. I think especially a guy like Alexius Komnenoi is highly underrated as an emperor. The guy, considering the lousy situation that he's in, what he manages to accomplish, and the fact that he managed to not just kind of hold the line, but to even improve situations before his death is wildly impressive. We'll talk about him a lot more when we get to him, and of course we're going to use the famous Alexiad written by Alexius's daughter, Anna Comnena, which is further down the line. But anyway, so Justinian. So who is Justinian? So he's born on May 11th, 482, in what is now Macedonia, the country of Macedonia, which is the tiny little one north of Greece. Justinian is a Chalcedonian Christian, so essentially an Orthodox, non-heretical Christian. He spoke Latin as his first language, although I'm sure he learned some Greek, of course, as that has become the lingua franca in the Eastern Roman Empire by this point in time. And he comes from a peasant family. This is really an interesting thing about him, is he is not of noble birth at all. He's born to essentially like that peasant farmer family. And the way that he gets involved in imperial politics and working his way up the ranks in the Eastern Roman Empire is through his uncle Justin. Now, his uncle Justin was the count of the Exubitores, who the Exubitores or the Exubitores were essentially an elite military force, imperial bodyguard type guys. So that put Justin in a position close to the emperor, to the point when there was a vacancy on the throne, Justin is going to be put on the throne. And when Justin goes to Constantinople as this very prestigious military officer, he brings his nephew Justinian with him as his adopted son. Justin didn't have any children of his own, and so he adopts Justin as his son. And when he goes off to Constantinople, Justinian's parents basically give him their blessing to go off and to do bigger and better things than whatever they were doing, whatever they were doing on their farm, essentially. Not that farming is, I'm not trying to talk down farming or anything, but it was a way for obviously for the family to move up the social hierarchy. Now, at the death of Anastasius, who we talked about in the last video, Anastasius was an older guy when he came to the throne, but a very high quality and competent administrator, to the point where he manages to increase imperial revenue without increasing taxes, which is very impressive. We did a video talking about Anastasius in our last video, it's entitled In Media Res. And so you can go check that out if you want to hear more about the accomplishments of the Emperor Anastasius. But when Anastasius dies, he has no heirs. And so there is no clear-cut successor to the imperial throne. And essentially what happens is Justin is chosen as Anastasius's successor, which might have seemed in a vacuum would seem like a questionable move, because Justin is he's not educated. He doesn't really have the qualifications, although he does have an extensive military background that's good to have, but there are some other things that you need in order to be the Roman emperor. However, everyone basically understood that Justin was a little older by this point in time, and because he had a clear-cut heir in Justinian, who was not just accomplished militarily, he's going to be given command of an army here in a minute that we'll talk about. But Justinian is also very well educated, and so they understand that Justin will simply be kind of a placeholder until he dies, and then Justinian will be the emperor, and everyone basically seemed to be content with having Justinian as the emperor in waiting, so to speak. And so with that, Justinian is going to be given command of the Praesental army, which is essentially, it's an army under the command of the emperor. It's not under the command of any specific general. Those are usually put out in more regional areas. These Praesental armies are more centrally located, and it allows the emperor in Constantinople to have more direct control over them. And so Justinian was promoted essentially to be to be a general of one of those armies. And it is during his time as the general of one of these presental armies when he's going to meet up with his buddy Belisarius. Now, if you know anything about Justinian, I'm sure you also know about Belisarius, and Belisarius is the general who Justinian chooses to go do the reconquest of the Western Empire. And so it's during this time that these two become buddies, and it's a very, very, very important relationship moving forward. Justinian also is then going to take a wife. Justinian is going to marry a woman named Theodora. Now, there's a lot, as we talked about in our Who Was Procopius episode. There's a lot of slanderous information out there about Theodora. I think that the whole, as I said before, but it's worth repeating myself. My take on Theodora is, she's a very competent woman. She was a faithful wife, very high quality advisor to Justinian, and this whole notion about how she was a prostitute and whored herself out while she was married to Justinian, all of this, she was essentially a prostitute before she married him, and just continued her carnal ways after they married. I don't buy it, really. I think it's a lot of tabloidy nonsense from Procopius. But she was of low birth as well, just as Justinian was, and her family was involved in the circus. Essentially, her father ran a circus, and so in order for Justinian to marry Theodora, his uncle Justin is actually going to have to bend the rules, because now, with Justinian being part of the imperial court, he's essentially he's part of the senatorial class, and it was basically illegal for members of the senatorial class to marry a person of a lower birth status like Theodora was. But the rules were bent for this. I think there is something to be said that Justinian came from a low birth, and Theodora also comes from a low birth, and perhaps they kind of understood each other better. Sometimes I do kind of, you kind of do think that if you have someone who I don't know, grows up in a trailer park, it's difficult for them to be friends with somebody whose parents bought them a BMW for their 16th birthday. There's a lot of just not. You're coming from very different backgrounds, is what I'm trying to say. I've observed this in kind of my own life, just watching, people who I've been friends with, and other people who are friends who I've observed. Not to get too psychological about this, but I do think this point of commonality between Justinian and Theodora was part of what made them so good together. And they were really good together. I seem to remember hearing in one of my Byzantine history classes that after Theodora died, obviously Justinian was devastated by it, but it sticks in my head that nobody even saw him for several days. He basically locked himself in his imperial bedroom and just mourned essentially for several days. So you can tell the two were really, really very close. And so after Justinian and Theodora were married, Justinian was named co-emperor with his uncle, and not too long after, Justin dies, and he dies in 527. And so Justinian goes from being co-emperor to being emperor. Then one of the very notable events from kind of earlier in Justinian's reign is going to be the Nika riots. So the Nika riots, which occurred in 532, basically happened because there were a number of factions. So there's four factions of the chariot chariot drivers. It's the blues, the reds, the greens, and I think the whites. They're all colors. And Justinian was becoming very unpopular among the blues and the greens of these charioteer factions. And supposedly at one of the chariot races, which I guess Justinian didn't attend very often, although there was basically a secret tunnel, so to speak. I'll refrain from singing the secret tunnel song, but there was like a secret passageway from the imperial palace to the imperial box in the the hippodrome that they had in Constantinople. And at one of these chariot races, Justinian was in his imperial box, and the crowds got whipped up into such frenzy, the supporters of the Greens and the Blues, that they actually like rushed the imperial box, and Justinian had to be escorted back out through the secret passageway back into the palace. And this led to days and days and days of rioting in Constantinople. Part of this was also due to Justinian's legal codex, and kind of leads him into a more anti-corruption campaign, and especially really not just, I mean, it's not just creating new laws. A lot of it is really enforcing the laws that are already on the books. And so there's a lot of people who are getting in trouble at this point in time for things they previously, even though it was illegal for them to do, a lot of times it would just be let go for this. And now you're having people who are being punished in various ways for things they weren't previously being punished for, because Justinian is compiling the legal codex, making sure it's all evenly enforced. And during the Nika riots as well, the Greens and the Blues even start conspiring with some of the senators in the senatorial class to overthrow Justinian with, I think it was the nephew of Anastasius, who they wanted to replace him with. And even during this time, Justinian supposedly considers abandoning the imperial palace. You know, there was one of the seemingly numerous secret passageways out of the palace was down to a dockyard where Justinian and Theodora could have gotten on a boat and basically left and said, thanks for the memories, but it's time to say goodbye. However, Theodora refused to leave. Basically, she told Justinian, like, if you want to go, you can. I'm not leaving. And of course, Justinian is not going to leave without his wife, and she essentially convinces him to stay and to, basically, I mean, almost as if she was to say to him, like, put your damn foot down, man. You're the emperor. You don't need to, you can't cave to these people. You got to go out there and you got to put these people in line. I'm sure is the sentiment of the message that Theodora would have told Justinian. But a couple of quotes that she supposedly said was that who is born into the light of day must sooner or later die, and how could an emperor ever allow himself to be a fugitive? And then she also apparently said, royalty is a fine burial shroud. The royal purple, I'm sure, would be an excellent burial shroud. But so Justinian does decide to stay, and he entrusts his new good friend, Belisarius, to put down the riots, which Belisarius does. He basically goes out there with his soldiers and starts just cutting down rioters, something that modern sensibilities, we wouldn't be especially fond of, but, desperate times call for desperate measures. In the ancient world, as I tell students, I mean, frequently, the ancient world is a very unforgiving place. Really, the world generally was a very much more violent place up until, I'd say, maybe post World War II was really when we kind of got this much more placid nature, I guess, as a civilization, and we were much more like turned off to violence, I guess. I mean, going through 2 world wars in less than 50 years probably does that to a civilization. But I mean, certainly in the ancient world, violence like this is very commonplace. And so then, as we go on here, this is just kind of meant. Today's talk is mostly meant to whet our appetite for Justinian. As we go forward, I'm going to split this up kind of into two more talks. Excuse me. And so really Justinian has four major accomplishments. And so the one great accomplishment that I think most of us certainly know of, again, if you're watching this channel, if you have any interest in Byzantine history, you know about Justinian's reconquest of the West, and that's going to be, that'll be a separate lecture in and of itself. I'm using, here I will grab the book from across the table here. We have here Procopiuses, The Wars of Justinian, or it's sometimes just called The Wars. Try to get the glare without it. This is the Hackett Classic. Again, translated initially by H.B. Dewing and then revised, modernized with introduction and notes by Anthony Caldelis, who is said Ohio State. I believe H.B. Dewing was from Harvard when he initially translated this in the 20s, and then Caldelis gives an update to it. I can't remember how recent this is, but it's fairly recent. But so we are going to have one episode specifically dedicated to Belisarius's reconquest of some of the Western provinces. You know, doesn't get to all of them, but certainly, I mean, certainly gets, I'd say, the two most important ones in Italy and North Africa, the two most profitable provinces, certainly in terms of revenue. Although you know, they're especially Italy, not quite as profitable as it once was, just due to the constant warfare and devastation. I mean, like I said in the past, especially when we did like our Visigoth episode and the Fall of Rome episode as well. You know, Rome and its surrounding countryside, even a decade after the 410 sack of Rome by Alaric and the Visigoths, was only producing 1/7 of the tax revenue that it had been previously. And consider as well, I mean, there's a real conflict for Italy in a way that there was not in North Africa. I mean, I'm almost done reading about the Vandalic War in Procopius, and it's over quickly. The Vandals were hanging on by a thread here, taking that over. There's not as much regional devastation. I don't mean to get too far off and too far ahead of ourselves, but I mean, come on, the conquests of Belisarius are just so fun and interesting. But the war devastation in Italy does take its toll. But then, so we'll have a separate talk on Justinian's other accomplishments, which, I mean, you certainly could spend an entire lecture doing so, but I think for the sake of time, and I don't want to get too far off into the weeds on some of these topics, because I think for our purposes, we don't need to. But so there is, for one, the Corpus Juris Civilis, or Civilis, as I prefer to say. I say, again, you know, there I go with my father doing the classical Latin pronunciation, even though this is really Greek, but yeah, I'm in the Western tradition. I can say that. The Corpus Juris Civilis, which was Justinian's legal codex, and it was the first Roman legal codex since the Theodosian legal codex, and that it was done by Theodosius II, not Theodosius I, although Theodosius I being, you know, probably the better of those two, but Theodosius II had compiled a legal codex, and I don't remember exactly what year that was. When I do that episode, I'll make sure to get the year on that. But the laws which had been put in place after the Theodosian Codex had not been kind of officially codified and written down. So the Justinian's Codex, again, the Corpus Juris Civilis, will officially codify all the laws that had been put in place after the Theodosian Codex. And I do believe it's through that we through the Corpus Juris Civilis that we get a lot of Roman laws, because it was maintained in the Eastern Roman Empire. I believe, you know, that, I mean, the document was basically maintained up until 1453, and when Constantinople falls in 1453, you get a lot of especially Greek monks who go west essentially as refugees, because, you know, now they're living in under Muslim rule. And I mean, again, not starting precisely, and I'm sure you would have had guys starting to move already before 15, but again, a general time frame here. But part of how a lot of these ancient texts get to Italy for the part of the Renaissance is this. Well, I mean, Renaissance comes from like it means rebirth, like René in French means rebirth. And so this new interest in the classics does a lot of it does come from Greek monks who are taking their library of texts with them because they're leaving. There's no Eastern Roman Empire anymore. There's no Byzantine Empire anymore. It's not Christian, and so they're leaving a new Muslim empire to go to Christian Italy, and they're taking a lot of these texts with them. And so that's where the Italian Renaissance thinkers to my understanding at least, a lot of these texts, although I know a lot of them do come through Muslim Spain as well. And then of course, Justinian, the buildings, as we talked about in our last episode about Procopius, who was Procopius, we said that he writes a book and it's literally just called The Buildings, which is about all of the buildings that Justinian puts together. This is part of why Justinian is considered a great, excuse me, a great Roman emperor, because to be a great Roman emperor, there's kind of there's two things you really have to be known for, and one is expanding the empire, and that typically means militarily, and the other is building stuff, like building projects that you put together that you look back on them, 100 years from then, and you can say, that was Justinian's project. Those are really features that define great Roman emperors. And the most famous of Justinian's building projects is the Hagia Sophia, or the Church of Holy Wisdom. There's a number of others as well. It's not just the Hagia Sophia, but that is certainly the best known. And Procopius writes a book on all of those things. And then one thing that is a little less known, I would say, about Justinian is his work on religious unity. Now, initially, when Justinian and Justin as well come to the throne, is they make an attempt to root out Monophysite Christianity. Now, you can go back and watch the video, which I believe is titled Monophysitism Explained, where I kind of go into detail about why Monophysitism is a heresy and how it got started, and the Church Council of Chalcedon dealing with it. But so Justinian and his uncle, being Chalcedonian Christians themselves, initially they tried to make a real effort at rooting out Monophysitism throughout the empire. And they have especially issues with it in Egypt, because that's where it originated, and it still held strong through the years. Justin and Justinian attempted to depose a number of Monophysite bishops down in Egypt, but they were unsuccessful doing it. It was really entrenched down there, and so they kind of left it alone for a while. And as well, another interesting thing to note is that Theodora, Justinian's wife, was a Monophysite Christian, described as kind of a moderate Monophysite, but nevertheless, she did kind of have an influence on her husband to kind of go easier on. I remember reading it said on heretics, but I'm assuming specifically that's talking about the Monophysites. However, as Justinian's life goes on, he does manage to kind of, I think at one point it said that there was a Monophysite bishop who was visiting Constantinople, and they basically detained him and replaced him with an Orthodox Chalcedonian bishop. And so Justinian works very hard to promote and Chalcedonian Christians and really root out heresies in all other parts of the empire. And he does start to kind of chip away at Monophysitism in Egypt, although, as I say, it's much more entrenched there. So he doesn't have quite as much success, but he really does a good job of unifying the empire under Chalcedonian Christianity. Hopefully when I do this, I realize I'm going into a bit more detail than I anticipated on some of these topics. So hopefully I'm not just repeating myself when we cover these other accomplishments of Justinian. But they're just so fun to talk about that yeah, it's worth talking about twice. But that's all I have for you today. If you've made it this far in the video, please make sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. Big shout out and thank you to Admiral Price for plugging the channel. It helped a lot. Really appreciate it. Admiral Price, if you're into Total War, he is, like I said, probably the best Total War YouTuber whom nobody knows about. As far as I'm concerned, he is the best in terms of especially insight into the game. I think no one does it quite the way he does it. So check out his channel. He's a really good guy as well. I mean, very interesting, PhD student as well. I can't say enough good things about it. I mean, I liked him before, but now especially since he's plugged the channel, it's pretty cool. And then if you're listening to us on Apple Podcast or Google Play, please make sure to give us a follow and a 5-star review. So that's all I've got for you guys this time, and I'll see y'all next time.